When a charity sets out to raise $1 billion, that's billion with a B, it doesn't just trickle in as small donations from the average person. It's a major campaign that requires commitments from big donors, corporate sponsors, and government grants. Joining us now to explain how they do it, Ted Gerard. He is the CEO of the Sick Kids Foundation, and David Palmer, Vice President of Advancement at the University of Toronto. And it's good to have you two in those chairs at our studio here tonight. I want to start with you. Sure. Sick Kids is in the midst of a, what is it, $1.3 billion campaign?
That's right, $1.3 billion.
I want to know just, like, where do you even get the notion in the beginning that you can raise $1 billion? Where does that come from?
Well, it starts by knowing that we have experience in having raised money before. So you look at what your normal rates of donations are, and then you start building out scenarios. How much more could we raise if we put it under the context of a campaign? So, you do it based on some level of experience, but also you set some stretch targets for yourself and the community.
Stretch targets. Remember the Premier using that expression once upon a time, stretch goals. David, how about at U of T? Who got the notion into their head once upon a time that, you know what, we could actually raise $1 billion, and that is not as fanciful as it sounds?
Well, we're now in our second $1 billion plus campaign. We just surpassed $2.3 billion towards a $2.4 billion goal. So we're really in the closing stages of that campaign. And I think it really comes from a sense of the scale and the scope of the institution and its community. I mean, campaigns are about connections that we make. Both Ted and I were traveling and bump into each other in Toronto. We bump into each other on the road in different cities around the world, because these are institutions with global partnerships and global networks. And the ability that the institution has to connect people to each other, to causes that matter to them, and how the institution itself can play a role, that's really the magic behind these campaigns.
And when you say $1 billion, yes, over what period of time are we talking?
Well, in our case, it's 7 years. So we started officially counting the campaign in 2015, and we'll wrap up in 2022.
And your campaign is over how many years?
Ours is over 12 years, so we'll be wrapping up this year.
This is the final year of
This is the final year of this $2.4 billion campaign. We'll probably be wrapping up north of that number in December of this year.
Does the money go to things as simple as keeping the lights on, or is it something much more fundamental than that?
Well, in part. So in the case of Sick Kids, part of the money that we raise goes to support our research institute, pay the principal investigators' salaries, keep the lights on and the labs going. That's funding that we just don't get from government, and why we rely on the community to be able to support it. And as we get great new discoveries coming out of our research institute, we can apply them at the bedside and improve the quality of life for the kids that we see.
And how about at U of T? What does the money go to?
Well, it goes to every part of the university's teaching and research mission. It goes to students in the form of financial aid and scholarships. We now award close to $200 million per year in student assistance to students. So a big part of what we do is financial aid. But the biggest part of what we do are teaching and research programs. And in there, really, it's about the excitement of the idea. It's ideas that motivate giving. I think people give to create change, and donors who give large gifts give to create change at scale. And what they're motivated by are the ideas that are driving that, whether it's a joint initiative that Ted and I and our colleagues at UHN worked on, the Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research, the largest gift to health science in Canada's history, or whether it is in the area of School of Cities, which we are about to launch at the University of Toronto, or whether it's financial aid. People give to create change, and they're motivated by the ideas of what they can accomplish with their philanthropy.
What's the biggest gift that's come in the door?
Well, the single biggest gift was the gift from the Rogers family. So $130 million shared amongst the three institutions, U of T, University Health Network, and Sick Kids. Our share of that gift was $41 million.
$130 million over what period of time does that come in?
7 years.
Over the whole 7 years?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That is an astonishing amount of money.
It is, but there was a vision that the family had to make Toronto a focus and a center for world-class research into heart disease, heart failure, and our three institutions said, we have some big ideas and plans on how we can actually reduce admission to hospital due to heart failure. And
okay, Ted Rogers is no longer with us, though. So who do you negotiate with from the Rogers family or company, or how does that work?
Well, the family asked us to work together on this. In fact, Edward Rogers took the lead on the family's behalf.
Ted's son. Yes.
Ted's son, Edward, but all of the members of the family were involved, as well as friends of Ted when he was alive, who are still advisors to the family. I think in their case, what Ted mentioned about the quality of the idea and the scope from pediatric to geriatric was a key factor. But the other part is the way this gift resonated with Ted's story and with the family's story. Ted was a great innovator, a great entrepreneur. He was also a great business leader. He also died from heart disease. And I think when the family decided they wanted to do something in his honor, it was the combination of leadership in the area as well as the innovation that was part of the idea that resonated with Ted's narrative.
When you get a big gift like this, and forgive, this is a very pedestrian question, but I don't know this stuff. Do they write you a check? Do they give you stock in the value of $130 million, or how does it work?
Well, up to them, really, in choosing the form of payment that they would like to do. So in some years, it has come through donation of stock. In other years, it's come in the form of a check. It's really what kind of tax benefit is best for the Rogers Foundation in giving this gift. And we allow our donors to make those choices.
Ted, how did you even know that there was enough wealth in the country to sustain this kind of a fundraising plan in the first place?
Well, I think we have to recognize that we're pretty privileged here in Canada to live in an affluent country. And again, when we look at the size of the charitable pie, what David is raising and what I'm raising is only a small portion of what exists across the country. Our job is to not only take advantage of those donors who are already well established in their philanthropic support, but try to find new people who haven't perhaps thought of giving to charity. And so a lot of the work we do is, trying to identify those affluent individuals or foundations that could support us who maybe just haven't been inspired yet by the stories that we have to tell.
I asked the question in part because your chancellor, Michael Wilson, when he was finance minister 30 years ago, once said, one of the biggest problems Canada has is not enough rich people. How could you be sure that there would be enough rich people in this country to sustain multiple billion-dollar campaigns?
I think there's a strong feeling we all have that we have barely scratched the surface of
Really?
the financial capacity for philanthropy in this country. We've seen, Ted and I, over the course of our careers, we've seen a huge upswing in the amount of philanthropy that's taking place in this country. It rises every year over the previous year. Even during major global recessions like 2008, we only experienced a brief dip of about a year or two before it began to exceed the levels before the great economic crisis. So with the wealth generation that's going on, with the transfer of wealth between generations, our job is not only to identify people who have a passion for a cause that we can solicit involvement in our cause, but also people who are themselves learning to become philanthropists. Because that whole field of what it means to make a gift and what are the expectations of a gift, that's changing rapidly too.
But I presume this is not like the Bernie Sanders campaign where you are picking up donations $27 on average at a time. I mean, you are dealing with the heaviest hitters in society, right? So the average size gift would be what?
I couldn't tell you the average size gift. I could tell you, to answer your question another way, I could say that about 99.9% of the money comes from about 0.5% of the donors. So we have donors who give $27, and we have donors who give $27 million, and we have donors at every point in between. I think the key is that people give to create change, and they are motivated by a cause. And as I say to my colleagues at U of T, and I'm sure you have the same kind of sentiment, the competitive challenge is to become the vehicle that addresses that cause, whether it's peace and justice in the Middle East, whether it's the latest advances in heart research, or whether it is financial aid for those people from disadvantaged backgrounds that don't stand a chance to be put on a good life path without that sort of support.
But Steve, I'd also say that in the case of sick kids particularly, we rely, yes, on the heavy hitters, but we do rely on community citizens to also put in those $27 or whatever they can afford. So our model is a little different. We do rely on the support of about 300,000 donors annually.
What percentage of them would be parents of former patients of your hospital?
There's a good percentage who are what we call grateful patient families, but I think there is a pride in this community around sick kids having a world-class children's hospital in their midst, and people, whether or not they are patients or have been patients, are inspired to give because they want to support having a globally recognized institution. There's always, we find, 6 degrees of separation between sick kids and somebody in the community. Because if it wasn't your child or you, it was probably another relative, a friend, or a colleague at work. And so, we do rely on smaller donations from citizens as well as the big gifts.
And how about in your case? What percentage would be alumni of the U of T?
46% of gifts to the campaign have come from alumni. Of the remaining 54%, it's split about 50-50 between individuals who are not alumni, but who are friends of the university, and the other part coming from corporations and foundations.
Now that's interesting. I would have thought your alumni contribution percentage would have been much higher, because if you went to U of T as a student and had a good experience there, of course you'd feel some obligation to...
Which I'm sure you feel as a U of T grad, married to a U of T grad, father of a U of T grad, and a son of a U of T grad.
And yes, I gave it the... No,
yes, exactly.
I do contribute to U of T. But again, I suppose my experience is very typical, because I had a very good experience there as a student, and therefore would like to see future generations of students enjoy that as well, which is why I'm surprised that 54% of your donors have no personal connection to the university. Why would they give if that's the case?
Well, again, I think it comes down to people who are looking to make a difference in the world, and whether they see the university or Sick Kids Hospital as the way to do that. So a great example, if you'll allow me one, is Paul Dell'Atlanta. Paul Dell'Atlanta is a business leader who is in the area of public health services. He came to U of T because he was ready to make his first very significant gift, and he wanted to do it in the area of public health, which had been his business, his expertise, his knowledge, and his interest. So he looked around the landscape, and he had no relationship with the university whatsoever. But when he did his due diligence, and I remember the first time I met him, he showed up in my office with a binder this thick of information on public health organizations. And when he came to know what was going on in public health at the university, one of the 3 original schools of public health, together with Harvard and Johns Hopkins, funded by the Rockefeller Center in the 1920s, when he saw what was going on, he decided to make a very significant gift.
How much?
$20 million to begin with, which he has since doubled. So now $40 million. This is an individual who's still in his early 50s. He is still, building this wonderful business, and he is deeply engaged with us. So there is a person who has no prior connection to U of T.
You had to put his name on something, right? Mm-hmm. Is that part of the deal, basically, when you're dealing with these kinds of heavy hitters?
Sometimes, sometimes not. Some very heavy hitters, donors to both Sick Kids and U of T, have stayed completely in the background. It's their preference. They give anonymously. Some actually give to honor others. One of the donors that is a major donor to the university often honors academics or figures in society that he particularly admires. And some are interested in establishing that family legacy, which we welcome, because the relationship that the donor has to the initiative is something that can be nurtured over time.
And let me just add one point. When we associate donors with buildings or named chairs or fellowships, for example, it's in part to provide the recognition for the gift, but I think more importantly what it does is it inspires other people to think about giving. And that's what I say to donors. You may not want the recognition, but think about how it can benefit us as the charitable organization in encouraging other people to do what you've done.
Have you ever had a situation where you go in to, let's say, make the pitch to Joe Smith, and Joe Smith eventually after the pitch says, well, that's pretty good, I'm going to give you $100,000. Do you ever go back to Joe Smith then and say, your friend, Mary Baker, just gave us $1 million. How can you be so cheap as to only give us $100,000? Does that happen?
I wouldn't put it in those terms, Steve, but I would, there is a lot of what I would say peer observation that goes on in the community about who's giving how much. And, you can use that in a
Because everybody knows, right?
Most people do.
You publish how much people give?
Yeah, we do. We study each other's donor lists to find out what people are giving. But I would say, again, the point is you try to inspire people to get to a level. You don't browbeat them into it.
That doesn't work, eh? Browbeating?
I don't think it does, personally. I think, as one of my former bosses, Gordon Cressy, said, give until it feels good. And I really believe that that is the basis of charity, that it is an altruistic act that, at the end of the day is making the donor feel good about the investment they're making in your organization.
Typically speaking, how many of those one-on-one trips to the potential donor's office will you have to make that pitch and answer all the follow-up questions before you finally hit pay dirt?
I think for very large gifts, let's say gifts of $1 million or more, you're typically looking at anywhere from a year to 2, maybe a year and a half on average, and maybe 6 to 8 interactions. Now, it can happen much more quickly, and it has, I'm sure. I know both Ted and I have had that kind of experience. And sometimes it can take a very, very long time, many, many years. But on average, some gifts percolate for decades, frankly.
How do you not get to the point where you've now made your 10th trip to somebody's office and you just don't know if it's happening, and, doesn't that get frustrating?
It can get frustrating, but I think one of the greatest attributes a fundraiser has to have is patience. And, you have to know when to say, this is not going to happen, but you also have to know that the investment is going to pay off. I can recall working with one donor who I spent 5 years trying to get a $2 million gift out of. And after the dozenth visit and 5 years, finally they said yes, and actually presented me the check when I came into the office. But I said, why now? Like, why after 5 years? He said, because now I finally trust you.
Oh my gosh, it took 5 years to trust you.
Yes,
Isn't that interesting?
And not so much trusting me, the individual, but rather trusting the organization and that the funds would be well spent.
Let's assume, I'm just going to pluck a number out of thin air here, 50 meetings with 50 different people. What percentage of that 50 would come through with a donation, the likes of which you were looking for?
Well, I think typically in our business, we look at a ratio of something like 5 to 1. Yeah. So if you are pursuing a gift in a particular area, and you hope that gift might be $1 million, just to pick a number at random, you might need to be in conversation with 5 such individuals with the ability to make that gift to be sure that chances are one of them might come through for you.
You got to spend money to make money.
Indeed.
What is your fundraising budget?
So our annual budget at Sick Kids Foundation is about $50 million a year. That's what we spend on our fundraising costs, the costs of employing our people, executing all of our fundraising, auditing, tax receipting, everything.
So you will spend $50 million,
right,
and you will bring in...
Well, we will bring in, on a cash basis, $150 million, but we will also bring in future commitments of over $200 million.
So you pay for yourself many times over.
We do, and that's the point, that we're not just thinking about raising money in the moment. We're thinking about also making sure we have a sustainable organization by raising future commitments.
And what do you allocate for annual fundraising?
Well, we use the CASE standard, which is the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. That is a standard used by universities across North America. We've averaged anywhere from 10 to 25 cents on the dollar over the last 10 years. Our average over that has been 16.7 cents per dollar. But the point I would love to make, and I hope people would understand, is that cost per dollar is not really the best measure of productivity. The best measure is yield. So how much does that yield? If you were to spend $20 to raise $100, you would yield $80. That's a 5 to 1 ratio, rather. But what if you could spend $50 to raise $200? That's $150 to the charity, but your ratio is different. Instead of 5 to 1, it's 4 to 1. That yield is going to be more important to that charity than that cost per dollar. Now, we all try to keep this to a minimum. We try to keep it to a reasonable cost, but we also want to see that likely for every dollar that's invested with us in cost, we will return something like $7 in new commitments.
Interesting. We're down to our last 40 seconds here. Where are you right now in the midst of your most recent campaign?
We have just about to hit the halfway mark, $650 million.
You've raised $650 million, and you are 3.5 years in right now?
That's right.
Okay, and where are you right now?
We're at $2.39 billion, so we are extremely close to our $2.4 billion goal.
And how many years in are you right now?
This is our final year, our 12th year.
12th year of 12. and then you start all over again, right?
Immediately, exactly. Yes.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you a check again.
All right, thank you, Steve.
Yeah. And probably you too.
Thank
I
you,
had enough
Steve.
kids come through your place as well. All right. That's David Palmer, University of Toronto, and Ted Garrard from the Sick Kids Foundation. Thanks so much, gents.
Thank you.
Our pleasure, thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.